Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast, and delighted to be joined today by Andreas Jones, who is a father, husband, an army combat veteran, also the founder and editor of kindofrugal.com and the Well and Wealthy newsletter. He's also the author of Financial Dignity and is passionate about all things personal finance. Andreas, lovely to have you on the show.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm really stoked about being here talking with you today.
We were talking off air about things that we could talk about today, and Plan B, and we're talking about things that we should and shouldn't talk about. And I think we both agreed that Plan B, but Plan B in terms of financial health, is really going to be the basis for what we're going to talk about today. Now, there's a lot of political, geopolitical, issues around the world. We're not going to talk about them per se, but if we just use that grey background that we have as to why people should be, for example, diversifying multiple streams, etc., etc. But really, all of that being said, I'll stop waffling. Plan B in diversial financification or financial diversification, I should say. Why is that important, and why is that going to become more prominent moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think, as individuals, we have to kind of reframe our perspective on work, the world around us, our finances, retirement, the whole thing. Because, we have created this kind of nostalgia about wanting things to be like the olden days. And while there are some great things about that, a lot has changed. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves that, you know, to what extent do we go back? Because we're not going to go back to what wages were. We're not going to go back to what things cost. We're not going to go back to, just accepting the status quo. And I think as generations have come and grown and kind of ingested what that tradition is about, I think where the discourse is that a lot of people are questioning the tradition. Like, well, yeah, go to school, get a degree, get a good job, retire at 65, 70, and then start to enjoy life. And then a lot of people are like, well, why? And then we kind of see the FIRE movement is a great example of this kind of questioning the status quo. It's like, why should I wait until I'm 65 to retire? When I could, save and be retired in 10, 15 years, a 10, 15-year career. And I think, in a piece that I wrote and on at entrepreneur.com about why Gen Z is not looking for the corner office anymore. That's not enticing to them anymore. That's not the dream anymore for a corner office. And so as we kind of tie this back on the personal side, I think because so much has changed, I think because the world has broadened in the prospects of reach and connection, with the advent of social media and the internet and everything else that has, evolved over the years. I think we have to then take the step back and say, how do I exist in this new world? How do I exist in a world where decisions and industries can change at the drop of a dime, where a discussion or a decision or whatever laws passed and your industry could go away or get affected, with tariffs, whatever the issue is, it could get affected, and next thing you're looking at layoffs, and you're saying to yourself, "Well, I thought I was supposed to get in this job, do it for 40 years." But now you only have one income and that income has gone away. What do you do? And so that's why I'm a big believer in diversifying your income, having multiple income streams, and having those kind of plan B discussions with yourself, with your family, with your friends, with your community, because that's just the world we live in. And for better or worse, I think we just have to accept that's what it is right now and plan accordingly and not get caught, flat-footed, get left behind with the ever-evolving and changing world that we're in right now.
I think that's a fair point, well made. I like to say to people that you would, the example I always like to give, if you're doing your, grocery shopping, whatever it is, and you go down to the grocery store and you have an idea of what you want for dinner that evening, and then, none of those products are available. normally you would say, well, if we haven't got X, then we're going to have Y instead. Well, believe it or not, that's a plan B. And I know that might sound like a daft example, but that's the example I like to give, that you might have, grocery store plan B, but when it comes to your government taxing you too much or only relying on one income, people don't think about that. And I find that amazing. It's one of the reasons I love doing this show and speaking to people like yourself, where we can talk about this and offer, practical steps for people to start thinking outside the box, so to speak.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the data shows that. I think last check, I stand corrected if anyone in the audience want to look this up, but I think the last check there were about 58% of workers have second jobs, side hustles, doing something other than their primary job. And I think that's with the recognition that you have, depending on one income is no longer an option, no longer a necessity. It's required right now to diversify your income because of how the world changes around us at warp speed, as it seems these days, with the flood of information, opportunities, and just the evolution of technology as we look. I mean, just think about we're talking,
Hmm.
on Zoom right now, or there's plethora of other communication services out there, which were not possible, a couple of years ago. And this makes us, you could be in one country, I could be in another country, we could have a good, clear quality discussion. And I think, it's just that we have to say, well, this is not no longer optional, it's a requirement. And I have to figure out how to diversify, how to have my plan B's in place because I have to take my future, my destiny into my own hands and not wait for your government, your employer, whoever it is to be a savior. I think we have to take the initiative to say, this is my life, this is my retirement, this is my finances, this is my family, and I'm going to do this is what I have to do to make sure that those are protected, they're cared for, they're provided for in whichever way that you do it for yourself, because it's going to look different for us. How I take care of my family might be different for how you do, but I think the fundamentals are the same. We're all trying to provide, protect, and care for families, whatever way that looks for you.
Yeah, I think the circumstances that everyone's going to have listening to this are completely different, and yeah, I totally agree with you on that. So how everyone approaches it, might be slightly different. It brings me back to a fantastic article that you wrote on kindoffrugal.com, and it was how to become a millionaire and a proven path that anyone can follow. And what I enjoyed about that is that it set it out, I think, quite cleanly, in terms of you really have to start from point number one. So, what is your financial position at the moment? What assets do you have? What liabilities do you have? What are you trying to achieve? And really creating a plan that way. Now, I've got spreadsheets galore of similar things, but go through that article. What inspired you to write that? And then go through some practical steps for people that might not have even got something in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thought behind that was a discussion with a friend. And they know that I'm into I write a lot. I'm in blogging and personal finance, and we just sparked up a conversation. And the discussion, I think, I said to him, becoming a millionaire is inevitable if you do this, this, and this. And that kind of inspired the article. And I said, maybe that's a good article to share out there. Maybe someone could pick it up. And I think it's if you once you understand that it becomes inevitable if you do these things, and that's what the article breaks down with accessing where you are right now. It says, okay, I got this in my savings, 401k, retirement accounts, checking accounts. I have my mortgage, I have car, loans, I got student loans, I got credit cards. Taking an assessment of all of that. That's your starting point. Then to figure out what direction you go in, and then you say, okay, becoming a millionaire, if I'm at 30 years old, I need to save $700 a month for the next, 20 years. And compound interest helped me get to $1 million. If you do that consistently over 20 years, it's inevitable that based on, assuming that the market delivers about 8 to 10%, which is absolutely done over a long period of time. And there's no belief to say that won't happen in the future. But conservatively, you could map out 8 to 10% returns in the market. And it's inevitable that if you do that over 20 years, you'll be a millionaire. And then so you kind of say, okay, well, you have to figure out then how do I get that $700 a month? And then you say, okay, well, I have my car note is $500. If I paid it off, that's 500 towards my 700. And then that's how you kind of back into that. And then it just becomes, as you can see, if you do that, it's inevitable if you save the 700 a month that you will get to a million. And I think, a lot of times when I've had discussions with people around, the word millionaire becomes a little intimidating because it seems like a lot.
Hmm.
And I'm like, a lot compared to what? What are you comparing it to? Like you comparing it to your income of $70,000. But when I kind of break it down to them that way, it's like, even at $70,000, that's inevitable. You will be a millionaire if you do this, this, and this. And there are, plenty of ways to pay off debt. And so we won't get into that, but there's a lot of research and data out there to do that. But I think the message I want to impart is that once you have this foundation understanding that this is the numbers, the math proves it out. There is
Hmm.
data, you can research the market data for yourself. It's inevitable if you do this. And once you have that base understanding, then you back into it. I'm not in the camp of don't buy anything, don't go on vacations, because my wife and I, we tried that and we were miserable. And that's hence the brand Kind of Frugal, because we're kind of frugal. We do go out and enjoy our good vacations, but again, we don't have car notes because we don't, car loans are a zero sum game. You're always going to end up on the losing side because they're a depreciating asset. You could buy $100,000 car. It's nice, but in 2 years, you lose 40% value, 30 to 40%. It's a losing game. So like, well, we decided like we're never going to have car loans again, and we will buy used cars, and we use that money to travel. That's how we travel, and we take pretty good vacations. We have two kids, and they have extracurriculars. My daughter's in gymnastics and cheer, and my son plays soccer. And those are the decisions we made because we're like, we don't want to, be in the camp of don't do anything because it was a miserable life. And I wouldn't, it's not sustainable at the end of the day to just cut everything off and not do anything. Because as human beings, we need kind of breaks in this regular schedule to do things. And
Hmm.
a lot of the financial discourse and articles about extreme frugality and stuff like that, it's very short-lived. Like you could do it. And I always tell people it's easier to make more money than to cut your spending in 50% or 20%. You can always make 20% more money. Hence, as we mentioned earlier, 54% of people have side hustles and doing additional things outside of their day-to-day jobs.
I think the key thing to take from that is for those that are listening that might not have even started thinking about their personal finances would be either open a spreadsheet, grab a piece of paper, and start doing that asset section and liability section. And then I'm sure you'd be an advocate for this of looking through your bank statements and looking at where, what subscriptions do you have or what's your expenditure and what are you using of that? Because as you pointed out, it's not always, yes, it is, easier to increase the amount of cash that you're earning and so forth. You don't have to go down that rabbit hole of being, super frugal. But if you could save £200 or £300 or $200, $300 a month by getting rid of X, Y, and Z, actually, that could or will make a big difference. So maybe the point is get a spreadsheet or get a piece of paper, start
Yeah,
writing these numbers down and go from there.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah.
In terms of being frugal, I appreciate that you uh, said that yes, there's a fire movement out there and so forth. Is this where it's also important to write down and think about your goals, think about your vision? Because if you want to say go on a nice holiday, like who doesn't want to go on a nice holiday? We all want to go on a nice holiday.
Mhm.
But I know that you wrote on Substack a while ago that it's not just about saying that, it's about framing it and being meticulous with your plan in order to achieve that. Could you just explain that a bit more and give an example if you can, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot, frugal, how I frame it is all about choice and decision. It's not so much about the saving money piece of it. Because being frugal comes down to value. What do you value? And that goes back to your point about what's your goals, what's important to you. And for us, my family and I, again, we wanted to take a nice, vacation. We wanted to, make sure our kids have the extracurriculars and stuff like that, while also saving for our future, for retirements, and making sure that we were taking care of in the future, but also enjoy today. And so it comes down to your values of, okay, here's why I don't want a car note because with this $500 a month that I'll pay for a car note, I could do this, this, and this. It helps me, save for the future, helps me make sure that my kids could, take their extracurriculars without having to go into debt, put it on a credit card, having a credit card balance,
Mhm.
which that kind of snowballs into a whole another set of issues. So I think if you just take it to a value discussion, like why do you want to do this? Um, it's not, and then the discussion doesn't become about money because I tell people all the time, personal finances is easy to figure out that if you make $100 and you spend $100, you have nothing left. that's
Mhm.
that's really easy to figure out. It's where the value comes in is what drives your decisions and your emotions behind that is why the newsletter is called Well and Wealthy is because it's an emotion and also the physical manifestation of
Mhm.
if I save if I make 100 and I spend 80, I save 20. This is what will inevitably happen with that $20 that I save, whichever way you do that. And so as folks think about personal finances and think about their values, I think it's also important to not fall in the trap of getting on the extremes of things. Like you don't want to, again, the extreme frugality stuff is very short-lived. It's not a sustainable lifestyle. But also the consumerism, we kind of see where that is right now, where here in the United States, the credit card balances are $1.7 trillion worth of credit card balance, which is
Mhm.
astonishing to think about. So we don't want to go extreme on the consumerism side also. But we want to find that balance. We want to figure out where our values lie, and we want to map that out. I'm a big proponent of kind of breaking things down and smaller. So, my wife and I, we have, 3 5 year goals, but we also have 90-day plans. Like in the next 90 days, we want to have a weekend, we do things like we travel around our local town
Mhm.
and find things to do there that's not, expensive, but when we do take a trip like we do our vacations, we could spend a little more, but we're still finding value and enjoying life around us in our town and our state around us, finding ways to do that in a cost-effective way and still feel like we're working towards something. Does that make sense?
It does, and it goes back to the point you made earlier on. It's understanding your values, working out what they are, but then also working as part in your case, working as part of a family unit. So working with your wife, obviously two children to look after as well. So again, everyone's situations are going to be different, but it's about that communication and that understanding and those values. And I think with a little bit of planning, yeah, we all give in every now and then. Yeah, I know there's a little coffee place around the corner from
Yeah,
where I am, and I like the frappuccinos from there. I'm just saying, so what at least once a week, normally at a weekend, you go round there, and again, the wife and I will go round, just take a couple of hours out, watch the world go by, have a chat, and that's what we like to do. But also, getting away and writing all this down is important. So it goes back to writing it down and understanding it, I think, in the first place.
absolutely. And this quick message I want to give to our listeners is that do not overcomplicate this process. Do not get bogged down in trying to get everything down to the final point. It's okay to not know everything during this process, and I think you'll find yourself much more fulfilled if you don't bog yourself down and trying to figure out everything out the next every step every because leave I always say leave the possibility of the amazing happening. Like yeah, I give an example of my wife and I, we went out to dinner at a fairly nice restaurant. We are talking to a couple beside us, and we're just we're just saying hey, they were celebrating the anniversary, and we're just saying hi as they were saying their tables are relatively close together, and then so as we are getting ready, as we finish a meal and we're getting ready to leave, the waitress said, "Well, someone there to pay for your ticket." I'm like, it's like they had left it for us. I was like, "Oh wow!" Like that wasn't our intent at all. It was just leaving the possibility of something amazing happens, and we're able to like we did that for another couple when we went out again, and it was an amazing feeling to do that. Just imagine because we were surprised and we just thought
Mm.
about how surprised they're going to be to know that, that someone paid their check without, kind of, making it a thing.
Yeah, so I've had that happen to me before as well. When I was traveling, I was at a bar in Dallas, Texas, and we got asked to move. My friend and I got asked to move a table because we were two people on a four-person table. So we moved. We said yeah, that's absolutely fine. And then a similar thing happened. A few beers later on, we went to pay for the check, and then all of a sudden, yeah, similar thing. Waitress come over and said, "Yeah, no, that table's already paid for it." And we're like, "Yes." Yeah, a bit of kindness and a bit of gratitude is always nice. Uh, that being said, Andreas, we've said just to recap what we've done so far. So we're saying to people that if you don't know your values and you don't know what you want to achieve, whether that be a holiday in Italy or financial freedom, whatever it might be, everyone's different. So we're saying write them down, get brainstorming, write them down. And then we're also saying from a financial point of view, if you haven't got a spreadsheet or you're not up to date with your numbers, get a spreadsheet or get a piece of paper, write down those assets, write down those liabilities. And then once you've got your targets, you can start working from A to B. We also mentioned at the start, you said was it 54, 58% of people with, secondary jobs, etc. So what else can people do for a general plan B given these current economic circumstances and current global climate that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another discussion is, what about exploring the world outside of your immediate area? So whether that be looking at, say, yeah, if I plan my retirement, I could at $3,000 a month, I could do this and this if I stay in the States. But if I go to Costa Rica, Peru, another, Vietnam, wherever, that goes a long way. And my quality of life increases. So I said, stay open to the possibility of things like that. You don't have to, again, get everything down to pinpoint accuracy, but be open to that. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they like explore, like, hey, let's go spend a month over here and see what happens. And you'll see a lot of stories of that where like we spent a month, but we loved it so much we stayed. And if you travel enough, you will meet people that happens a lot. Where like yeah,
Mhm.
we came to visit for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and 5 years later we're still here. Because they were open to explore outside of their immediate environment. And I think with the world being as global and as connected as it is via the internet and also transportation with you can pretty much find flights going to anywhere in the world or a ship or whatever. Be open to explore the possibilities that while it might not be perfect here, there's possibilities of it being pretty awesome. There's no perfect place, but it could be pretty awesome somewhere else. And I think that's also part of your plan B thinking also is that don't get tied down to a place or a plan without a possibility of it changing because you and I know life is constant change in life. And I think if you set yourself up for failure, if you stay anchored into it has to be this way versus I would like it to be this way, but I'm open if that changes. And live in that, unknown. Like I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I'm open to exploring it and explore. Go outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that's easier said than done. I know that I've gone through a lot of plans before, and it's like, well, this is plan A, this is plan B, this is plan C, and then none of that happened, and then I know that I personally can get quite frustrated with that, but that's just the way that I'm wired personally. So, yes, I do think it's quite pertinent that if you are, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, whatever, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, that we said we wouldn't speak about. But the point being that, even if it's, I'm going to move to Brazil or whatever country it might be. All right, like you said, maybe just go on holiday first. Take some time out, enjoy yourself, get down there. And like you said, there's so many instances of people going, well, we come here for 2 weeks and we really stayed it, we really enjoyed it, and then 3 years later, oh, we're still here because it's great. It's
Mhm.
life.
Yeah,
So getting a second passport or some form of residency, I've done it, and that's important. I've done it for personal circumstances, so I can vouch for that aspect. It's really good. There is no such thing as a perfect country, without a shadow of a
exactly.
doubt. But if you like me, I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet. I've noticed that the costs between life in the United Kingdom and the life in Mexico, it completely different. And yeah, I think I'm a similar to yourself in terms of I always look at the bottom line. So if I can make my life as cheap as possible while still having the enjoyment, so that means, you know, I don't know, tax bills being as low as possible, electricity bills, utility bills, whatever it might be, then I'm all up for that personally. But everyone's different. Um, and Andreas, what other well, we've covered a lot. What other key things do you think people need to know about before, getting started on this, financial journey? Anything we haven't discussed that you think people, should do?
Yeah, I think it would be very important for us to mention that your plans will change. And so again, important to drive that point home is that yes, you could like develop your plan now, but it's going to change. I can always guarantee it's going to change. Your priorities are going to change. Like I could, for example, for us right now, our plans includes our children,
Mhm.
but our children will get older. They'll go off to college, and our life is going to change at that point. Our priorities become different, and so yeah, that's just a very rigid example that a lot of people will go through. But there's, careers change. Like, again, part of the discussion around this plan B and diversifying the income is that careers could change. Opportunities could come where, hey, we have this opportunity for a 30, $50,000 raise, but we have to move to a different state, a different country, whatever the case may be. And, whatever plan that you had before, it changes because one, your local changes, but also your income changes, and that kind of opens up more possibilities for you. So I think it's very important to for listeners to understand that your plans will change and be okay with that. Again, the math piece of personal finance is pretty easy to figure out, but the emotional piece and the value, there's some work to be done, and I don't want this to get lost in our discussions that there's some work needed that you would have to do. There's some time that you have to put in. But I think you would agree that it's time well spent. It's time that you will appreciate, and the return on investment is pretty spectacular if you do it right.
Yeah, it really is. No, that goes all back down to, communication if you've got a spouse and so forth. Take time to do that. I know visions and values and things that are important like that, they don't just come, with a click of the finger. They can take a while. Uh, Sleeping on it, not just once, maybe twice, maybe for a week, and then really getting in tune with yourself. And finances can be easy or hard. Depends on your situation, depends on, how many bank accounts do you have, or how many jobs have you got, how many side hustles, businesses, writing, whatever it might be. How much do you spend per month? People's situations are going to be different. So some people might find that aspect easier. Some people might find that quite difficult depending on their circumstances. And I think the key point that you've just made there, Andreas, that we haven't really spoken about, and we probably should do quickly, is it's the mental fortitude that is needed in order to do this. And that sometimes can be the most difficult bit.
It is because again, for the most part, you are going against what the traditional script is. Go to school, get a degree, get a good job, work for 40, 30, 40 years, retire. And for the most part, you're going to go against that script and it's going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes your family, your friends won't understand. I think you'll see a lot of this in the fire community where people think they're crazy and like, why would you do that? Like, and so, you know, be okay with that, and find community. I think of importance we should also stress is you have to find your community. There's a community out there of people who will think like you, who will kind of visualize and see, understand your vision, and kind of cultivate that community, no matter how small or big it is. Because I think that's going to be important on the mental fortitude side. Because if you're constantly having to make this plan, but also you're dealing with family, you're dealing with friends, and you never have that kind of supportive piece of it,
Mhm.
it becomes a mental drain. And you almost, a lot of people will give in to that, to the noise of and the pressures and the naysayings of family and friends. And your family and friends might not mean harm doing it. They just don't understand. And they're more than likely operating from a place of fear because they can't fathom how could you go against a script that we all have been given that we should do this. And they can't see themselves doing what you're doing because they haven't taken the time to, again, go through the process of what's important to me, understanding, what my assets, my liabilities,
Mhm.
what's my plan. And so it's going to be hard for them to understand if they've never gone through that process. And so it's important to have community to help reinforce that, support you through that, and with the hope of that your family will see we'll see the light sooner or later, and so that you guys could kind of enjoy that process together, and it becomes a much easier process. But I won't. It's been difficult for my wife and I because again, it's not the norm.
Mhm.
My parents are of the traditional mindset where they always told us go to school, get a good job, and my dad just retired at 65, and her parents are in the same boat, and we're talking about we possibly could retire in their late 40s, early 50s, and they're like, that's crazy. Yeah, they don't mean harm, but they just don't understand, and they've never kind of gone through
Mhm.
that process. And so that's going to be important to have community around you, but the mental piece of it's of importance. And I would say, being a veteran of myself, it's okay to seek help professionally, if you get there. Please do. It's okay to seek help professionally. I did. It was very helpful to me in my process of kind of reintegrating after I came back from Afghanistan and stuff like that to kind of make sure that I was showing up for my family in the right way. And so
Mhm.
I want to make that clear that, seeking that professionally is absolutely, um, important if you get there. And again, your community will help you kind of figure out when that point is. Because, again, as you build community and people start understanding more, like maybe you need to talk to someone about this and be open to those discussions. But I know it's uncomfortable, and I know a lot of people kind of there's stigma around mental health and you know all that stuff. But I think it's very important and a good message to say it's okay to seek help professionally when you need it to.
Like very prudent information and advice there, and I'll second that. There's always yeah, just go and seek help if needed. It's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, and it'll chances are it'll make you a better person, and you'll probably get better results from that as well. Andreas, just last question, because I know that you recently wrote a book. It's called Financial Dignity. Uh, Tell people a little bit more about that and how they can find it, and also how people can find yourself in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book Financial Dignity. So the book, the inspiration behind the book is basically a lot of the financial literature was around, the how to retire rich and that stuff. And I think a lot what we kind of talked about is a lot of people haven't like taken that step to figure out where they are right now. And the part of the financial dignity that I'm talking about in this book is to get to a point where every decision is not driven just by finances, not, well, I would like to, take a weekend with my kids, but we don't have the finances, that make get to a point where the discussion is, I would like to, do this with my kids, but we have this other thing that we have to do, and it's not driven because of finances. And a lot of the struggle that I've seen over the years is that because when you get stuck in the paycheck to paycheck cycle, it's hard to take a step back. It's hard to breathe. And the real purpose I want to be out of this book is to say, here's how you get to a point where you could breathe, where it's okay. I make 1,000 this month, and yeah, I spend 900 or 950. I still got $50 left. And that's a much different feeling than when you make 1,000 and you spend 1,000. It's just that having that $50 means it just changes your perspective and everything. And the goal is to string together a couple months like that where you have a little room at the end of the month. And eventually, again, we talk about how things become inevitable. Eventually, you'll get to a point where, well, yeah, I'm able to kind of make some other decisions and everything doesn't come down to financial because that's so integrated in every part of our lives. And so that's the purpose behind the book. And yeah, that's gotten good reviews so far. And if you pick it up, I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. So again, you can find me on my blog kindofrugal.com, my newsletter and Substack, the What on Wealthy newsletter, and at any social at Kind of Frugal across all social media.
Fantastic. And as usual, for those people that listen to this on the Substack platform, if you have a look at the notes that go with that, then all of those links will be in there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, again, just looking at that description box and all of the notes will be in there. Well, Andreas, I think we've made some very good points today. I think it's very clear that people that haven't thought about this sort of stuff yet need to go away, think about visions and values, which will take time and mental fortitude, as you said. Also, look at your asset and liability sheet. Again, that might take time depending on your circumstances. Create some goals as well, whatever goals they might be, they're your goals, so they work. And I think that's probably enough. I don't want to say homework because that's not the right word, but I think that's enough for people to go away and think about from a practical point of view. And then if you're in a position where you want to go to a different country, etc., and explore those options, again, go out and enjoy it because you never know what's around the corner. I think that's the best way I can summarize it. Anything final to add to the listeners today at all?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary. And I think, the last point I'd like to leave to the listeners is that, you know, be open to the possibilities. There are opportunities everywhere. And make it resolute that diversifying your income is no longer optional, it's a requirement.
Perfect. Well, on that note, Andreas Jones, thank you very much for your time today. Look forward to hopefully catching up later on in the year and have a fantastic day.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.